So where we last left off, it looks like, is using getLine to read an entire line of text in. When you start mixing getLine with using CIN arrow, it starts messing up. So we're not going to really want to do that. And I don't think that we're going to spend too much time doing examples based on that. Just know that you can read an entire line of text in rather than just one piece, because you remember that using CIN arrow only gets you one piece. But then, like if you were wanting them to type in a number, getLine returns a string, and you would have to call some kind of string to number conversion, which is not quite as trivial as what it should be, and as trivial as it is in other numbers. So I'm not going to ask you for any assignments that require you to use getLine, just because mixing getLine and CIN arrow, we saw it last time, it was annoying, it didn't work right. So you can also read a single character. You create a variable that's a character rather than a string. You tell them strike any key to continue, and then you do CIN arrow CH. Only problem is that if the key they happen to hit is a space or a tab or a carriage return, that's not going to work. So what you can do is you can use CIN.get, and it will read everything, even a carriage return or a space or a tab key. The only reason I could see for using that is like if at the end of the program you wanted to be able to hit any key to exit. We haven't been doing that because the PC users use pause, and the Mac users, their program doesn't close the window as soon as it's done anyway, so it didn't matter so much. So here's an example of using .get to pause the program temporarily. This program is paused. Press enter to continue. CIN.get, and you pass in a character to fill in. It is paused a second time. Press enter again. Same thing. CH is equal to CIN.get. It is paused a third time. Do it one more time. All right, CIN.get. Thank you. I'm not going to ask you to use .get either. You can play with it if you want. Same for getLine. If the quiz asks a question about getLine, yeah, sure. Stick it in your brain that that's how you get an entire line of text, getLine. And .get gets a single character, right? So getLine gets you a whole bunch, or it can, and .get gets you a single character. Alrighty, so if you mix CIN arrow and CIN.get in the same program, that can cause input errors that are hard to detect. So to skip unneeded characters that are still in the keyboard buffer, use CIN.ignore. Let's play with that, because that would probably fix the error I was talking about when you use CIN arrow and you also mix getLine. Really? Go away. All right, I grabbed my boilerplate. Try to get Edge to close. Finally. All right. New project. What lecture are we on? J? All right. C++, empty project, lecture J. Add a new item to the source file if you don't see that thing there. View Solution Explorer. Right-click Source Files, add new item. We want a C++ file. Again, I'm going to call it lecture J, just to distinguish it from the other. If I left everything saying source.cpp, it'd be okay, but harder to differentiate. Paste my boilerplate. I bet y'all have already gotten all that done. All right, so let's mix using CIN arrow and getLine. So cout arrow, enter a number, colon, end quote, semicolon. Now we need a number to read into. So int x. CIN, arrows the other way, greater than x. Now let's read a line of text. We're going to use getLine. Make sure I absolutely get this right because I stumbled over it 2 weeks ago. Okay, now I remember. We need a string to read into. Cout arrow. Now enter your whole name, colon. I did not mean to leave that hello world line there. Colon, end quote, semicolon. We need a string to read into, so string S. CIN arrow, no, I want to use getLine. GetLine, parentheses, CIN, comma, S. Use CIN to fill in the S variable. Now, let's enter another number. So it's going to kind of be a rehash of this stuff, except we could delete that int x line. Or we could change those x's to y. So for ease of typing, and the note Barbara, we're going to highlight these lines. We're going to copy. We're going to paste them and then change those x's to y's. And we may as well make it say enter another number.
You want name left in there?
Pardon me?
Now enter your whole name. Are you leaving that in there?
Yeah. Right. Enter a number, type in your name, enter another number. I'm trying to set it up so that we see an error when this runs. It won't let them type in a name, or it won't let them type in the second number. Let's see if that's the case. Let's see if that's set up. All right, enter a number. I'm going to make the font larger. $12 something. How come my cursor is large? There. Enter your whole name. Whoops. Enter another number. You see what I mean? It botched. GetLine did not work. It skipped GetLine. We can use CIN.ignore to try to fix that, according to the slide. CIN.ignore 10 comma followed by a new line. Let's see if that works. So before we let them type in getLine, we're going to do CIN.ignore. Ignore the next 1,000 characters, comma, or the next new line. So single quote, \n, in single quote. Those are apostrophes, not double quotes. What does that 1,000 mean? It just means ignore everything. They use 10. Probably 1 would be enough. But we have to have that before getLine because we saw what happened. As soon as we typed in a number for x, then the next call to getLine failed. It skipped it. This is saying clear the buffer, clear everything that was waiting for me so that when they type in, it's brand new, fresh data. Enter a number, 6. Now enter your whole name, Joe Bob. Enter number 7, 6, whatever. Okay, so that's actually working. If you find that it's skipping your input for some reason, for whatever reason, you can use CIN.ignore. That 1,000 is not a magical number. I bet 1 would work. So enter a number, 1. Now enter your, see, just the 1 word. Okay. So it's a good idea to call .ignore before you call getLine. I'm going to make notes to that effect. So example, CIN.ignore, parentheses 1 comma, single quote, \n. Either ignore one character or ignore new line. And then getLine CIN.s, where s is the string you're reading in. And we should have told them what to type in. So I'm going to do a cout somewhere above here. Cout, arrow, arrow, quote, enter your full name. Colon, space, end quote. You've already got all that, but I'm putting it in a notepad. Okay. And the reason I don't use getLine more often is because once it only reads in strings, and if you wanted to turn it into a number, you have to find some version, some code for converting a number to a string. I could Google that up, right? Convert C++ string to like int. I'd find some ways of doing it. Looks like STOI would do it. Let's find an example. Yeah. I'm not going to mess with it. It's using pointers. I don't want to teach y'all pointers at this point. Okay. Kind of take it on faith, I guess. That if you want to read in a number, use CIN greater than greater than. If you want to read in a string and you want them to be able to use the type in more than one word, use getLine, but you better precede it with a call to ignore. What does ignore do? They typed in that number, they hit enter. Well, that enter is still out there waiting to be read in. And calling .ignore tells it, nah, throw that away. So string member functions and operators. If you want to add two strings together, you use a plus sign, just like we did when we're adding numbers. So for example, string S1 equals quote Joe, end quote, semicolon. String S2 equals quote Bob, end quote, semicolon. String S3 equals S1 plus S2. And then print out S3. So cout less than S3. Cout less than. Maybe I better put a description of what it is. S3 equals, end quote, less than S3 less than ENDL. Guess what it's going to say? It's going to say Joe Bob. It's going to add S1 and S2 together. Not going to add them. It's going to concatenate them, which means append. Except we have to get all fancy and use a Latin term for it. Here we go. Enter number 5, 6, blah, blah, blah for name. Enter another number. All right. S is equal to Joe Bob. Now, really, I probably would like to have seen a space between those, unless that really is one word. So how would I do that? I'd put a S1 plus quote, space, quote, plus S2, like that.
What if you put a space after the E and Joe?
That would work just as well. I could have done that, right? But when your name comes in, it's usually going to be trimmed down to the bare minimum. Very good point. Another problem with CIN is what if you give it the wrong input? What if you type in a letter instead of a number when it's expecting a number? So enter a number. No. Now enter your whole name. Enter another number. See, it just went berserk. So there are ways around that. The best way to get around that is to use getLine everywhere, and then try to do a conversion, and if the conversion fails, tell them to enter it again. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. You have to reset the error state. It's in an error state once you typed in a string rather than a number. Anybody got syntax errors that you wish to have mine eyes upon? Anybody need me to stop talking and let you type in? All right, I'm going to take a 2-minute break. That's called concatenation. There's other ways you could do it. I think I've demonstrated this before. Like string S4 equals, tired of using boy names, Sally, end quote, semicolon, and then S4 plus equals a space, so quote, space, quote, plus, what's Sally's last name? Fields, end quote, semicolon. That's looking wrong.
What is the plus and equals supposed to do?
That's like doing x plus equals 1. Very good question, because we haven't been doing x plus equals 1 like we've been doing in my Python classes. You know what? I'm so disenchanted with the idea that that didn't work that I'm going to erase all that. No, I'm not. I am going to get it to work. But what I'd have to do is put a semicolon there, go to the next line, and then do S4 plus equals fields, like that.
You go into further detail about the plus.
Yes, I'm not going to skip that, right? So what this does, this is the same as saying, I'm going to put it as a comment, S4 equals S4 plus a space. It's a shortcut for saying that. And I should have introduced it earlier before I showed it for a concatenation. So right now I have a number named y. I could do this. Y plus equals 10, semicolon. And I'm going to make a comment that that's the same as y equals y plus 10. Now, is that making sense? You're not dumb for asking. I hadn't shown that before. We're good on it now? If you did y minus equals 10, that would be the same as y equals y minus 10. It subtracts it and stores it back in it.
After further review, I will put the most.
If you do a single thing like this, y plus plus, that means add 1 to it and store it back into y. We've done that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is the same as doing y plus equals 1, which is the same as doing y equals y plus 1. All three of those are equivalent to each other. Take y and add 1 to it. Now, you Python folks didn't have this option. You always had to do it that way, or you could do it that way.
So it would just keep adding 1 infinitely?
Well, not infinitely. It's only going to add 1 time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if we put it in a loop, then it would keep adding as long as the loop was executing. I introduced that too early, so I am not surprised that there was some head scratching.
Can they see line 7?
Which line?
Line 7.
Let me come look.
7. Using
I see.
On the same topic, you want to add 10 something, multiply something. X equals X times 7. You could do the same thing with X times equals 7. It's just a shortcut. Purely, that's all it is. Except here I'm using it for concatenation rather than addition. Now I'm going to make a point about the difference between concatenation and the point of addition. All right, I hear laughter and I'm not involved in it. It's hurting my feelings. All right, if you don't necessarily do this, but if you change that to a 1 and you change that to a 2, then is the result of adding 1 and 2 equal to 3? Well, especially not with that space there, right? But what's it going to print?
once it quotes, it's going to print the letter.
It's going to print a 1, followed by a space, followed by a 2.
Right.
And even if this was gone, it's still not going to print 3.
Yeah.
It's going to print 1, 2, right?
It's
It's going to print 12 because they're strings. They're not numbers. It's not going to do math on them. It's just going to stick them together. Right. So it doesn't matter what kind of data these are stored inside here. If it looks like a number, too bad it's not a number. It's a string, and it's going to be treated like a string. So if we try to add them together, instead it's going to concatenate them. It's just going to glue them together. Now I'm going to undo all that. More math library functions. Since we may already have CMath included in our boilerplate, and I hope you do, then we can do this stuff. We can use sine, we can use cosine, we can use tangent. Now, these work in radians rather than degrees, which I'd kind of forgotten what radians were until the last time I had to use sine, cosine, and tangent. So you have to have a function that'll convert degrees to radians in order to use sine, cosine, and tangent. Or vice versa, I forget which. Like the tangent of 45 degrees, but you have to convert 45 degrees to radians. But anyways, you want to take the square root of something, you use the square root function. If you want to get the log of something, you use the log. If you want to take the absolute value of something, what's the absolute value of negative 3? 3, right, and the absolute value of positive 3, 3. So we may as well use some of those functions before we go much further. Now, conveniently, they don't even demonstrate any of those. But we can do that ourselves. So I'm going to skip over here. I think I'm going to scroll up to the top because I don't want to have to enter a number and whole name and everything every time I want to do this. So let's declare some variables. Int a is equal to 4, comma, b equals -1, comma, c equals 3. I hope that didn't introduce any syntax errors. I don't think any of those variables are already in use. Int d, wait, let's make it a double. We want to get the square root of a. So double s square equals sqrt parentheses a. That'll get the square root of 4. If we print it out square, it better print out 2. So C out, arrow, arrow, square, arrow, arrow, E and D out. I'm real curious about what happens if we pass in a negative number there. That creates something called an imaginary number. Because what would the square root of -1 be? What times what equals -1? So let's find out. Let's pass in b instead there and see if it croaks out an error or what. Not a number. That's what that stands for. All right. Well, anyways, so you're not going to want to use the square root function if it's a negative number unless you write some math functions that support imaginary numbers. So I'm going to change that back to an A. What other C math functions are there? There's absolute value. So C equals ABS B. The absolute value of -1, if we printed it out, would be 1. I'm just going to put a comment to that effect. C equals 1. I'm curious as to the effect, as to the idea that we would have to prefix these things with std::: if we took out using namespace std. I wonder if that's the case. Don't do what I'm about to do. I'm going to move that down to here, and then I'm going to try to compile it to see if I needed to prefix those functions. Nope. What do you know? All right. Let me undo that change. And then I thought I saw a hand raise.
Because they're in the C math, right?
They're in C math, but some of the things do require STD. Everything inside IOStream requires prefixing with STD. If I didn't have that line there, if I took that line out, I'd have to do this everywhere that STD appear, or these things appear. I'm going to undo that. All right. Did I see a hand raise?
That was just construction, sorry.
Okay.
I just want to see you get counted.
I need my cardio, so I like getting up. I'm not going to demonstrate sine, cosine, and tangent. Square root's useful, right? We've learned another way of taking square root. I think I mentioned that if you do raise something to the power of 1/2, it does a square root. You didn't need to bring in C math in order to do that, but not everybody knows that, so it's nice to have a square root function. And then there's the cstand_lib header file. cstand_lib will let you generate random numbers. What are random numbers? Random numbers are ones that you cannot predict, like rolling dice. Let's use cstand_lib to generate like 10 random numbers. So I'm going to go up here and add one more thing. Include angle cstd::lib. And up here at the top, just because I don't like having to enter all that stuff, you could write it down at the bottom of your notes just as easily. I'm going to C out, arrow, arrow, quote, random space, end quote, arrow, arrow, rand, int. Am I getting this wrong? I'm not seeing it pop up in my little helper. Oh, it's just rand. Sorry, just got out of Python where it's rand in. Followed by ENDL. Now this rand function, oh, why is that an error? Oh, because I made it END rather than ENDL. All right, that returns a number between 0 and the largest number that an int can hold, which is a little more over 2 billion. And you think to yourself, well, really, all I wanted is a number between 1 and 6. I wanted to play Yahtzee with a die. Or I was playing D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, or Pathfinder. I wanted a number between 1 and 20. So what am I going to do with this 1 billion or 775,000 or whatever? One random number is not fun. We need more random numbers. So I'm just going to copy that line and I'm going to paste it like 10 times in a row so it'll print out 10 random numbers. And I'm going to paste using Control-V for speed. If you're handwriting these notes, you don't have to do all that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, just put times 10.
I highlighted it times 10.
Yeah, yeah. All right, and there's our random numbers. These are actually called pseudo-random numbers because they're derived by a mathematical formula. The mathematical formula uses as input the last random number to generate the next one. Your numbers may be exactly the same as mine.
It is
They should be exactly the same as mine.
That's not random.
Then it's not random. The problem is that this mathematical formula I'm talking about, it's starting out with like 0 as its so-called seed. And so 0 goes into it and it generates a 41. Then 41 gets passed into it and it generates that 18,000 number. And 18,000 gets passed into it and it generates that. Doesn't look random, and it's not really. It's pseudo-random, where every number generated is a permutation of the number up above it. What you got to do is you got to so-called seed it with a different value. Make it less predictable by seeding it. So srand sets the seed for it. So I'm going to do srand parentheses 100 just to watch what happens if I seed it with a different value. All right, it's still going to be the same every time, but at least it's a different same, right? Not starting off with 41 each time. So what's the real key? The real key is to stick a number in here that's kind of unpredictable, like the number of seconds since midnight. It's unlikely that we will all manage to run this at the same time, the same number of seconds since midnight. So to do that, we would need to fill it in with a time function, the result of a time function. And I hope that's what the next slide shows. So we're going to need a variable that will hold the result of a time function. Maybe not. I'm going to, before I blather, let me go and look at the notes. Oh, of course not. All right. We're going to Google it up because I want you to know how to generate random numbers that look random. And by the way, the random library functions that you use in Java or Python, go ahead and initialize, set the seed to a number based on the time so you don't have to do this. You can still hard code the seed to something so that you can predict the sequence, because if you're testing something, sometimes you want to know what numbers, right, in advance, but usually you don't. You're playing a game, you don't know what order these things are. Okay, so srand time. Random number generation functions. Open up. All right. We're going to have to add one more thing. We've already included standard lib.h. Well, this is C programming, not C++, because we can tell that because the file headers include .h. Let me do another search, but tack on C++ here. There's a better class for generating random numbers than what we are doing here. All right, so if we fill in srand with the result of a time function call, then it'll fill it in with the number of seconds since midnight, and it'll look a lot more like a random sequence of numbers. And at this point, this is just kind of for fun. Later on, I'm going to want you to use random numbers. But we need to come up here. We need to include, #include time, angle time.h. The fact that it's called .h means that it's a C header file rather than C++. And you think, I don't care. But C is more primitive than C++. It doesn't mean that you can't use C inside of C++. So here, instead of srand 100, we're going to do srand parentheses time parentheses null in all caps and in 2 closed parentheses. Now that looks a little bit weird. And like I said, this is just for fun right now. I'm trying to tuck away the idea of random numbers so that when we use them again next time, it makes a lot more sense. Now the numbers are really going to look random. When you run them, they're going to look different than mine, and each time I run them, they're going to be a different sequence of numbers. I hope. 10676.
I gotta say,
I got different.
Okay, 10696. Since it runs by seconds, if you run it at the exact same second I do, then you're going to get the same answer, 10725. You can even base it on milliseconds. There are other functions that return milliseconds, and it would be, you know, more random still. And I lied when I said it was going to be a number between 1 and 2 billion. It looks like it's a number between 1 and 32,000. It looks like it's a short value, a 16-bit value rather than a 32-bit value. The next problem you would have to solve is how to turn that into a number that you want to use, like a number between 1 and 6. And I'll give you a hint. You would use modulus. So, why don't we go ahead and change it? We're going to have to change all of these guys, or maybe we could just copy and paste it. Take that last line, copy and paste it. We're going to generate random numbers between 1 and 6 by doing a modification to the result of this function. What we're going to do is after it returns a random, we're going to modulus it by 6, and we're going to add 1 to it. Why? Because if you modulus something by 6, it becomes 0 through 5. And then if you add 1 to it, it becomes 1 to 6. So this will generate a number between 1 and 6. And if we made it %20, it would generate a random number between 1 and 20. If you made it %100, it would modulus it by 100. So it would be between 1 and 100. And you could copy and paste that 10 times as well, if you wanted to. Or maybe just 3, 4, whatever, 5 times. That ought to be enough to prove the point. Now when I pasted it, it added spaces everywhere. I'm okay with that. All right, and there we go. See, these look like die rolls in a game of Yahtzee or something. Make me feel old, guys. Who has not played Yahtzee? Only a couple hands. All right, all righty. It's one of those old pastimes. Okay. So, this is how you generate a random number between 1 and 6. And I'm going to make a comment to that effect, either above these things or below. That is how you generate a random number between 1 and 6. To change it to like 1 into 20, you would just change that 6 to a 20. If you wanted it to be 3 to 25, it'd take a little bit of thinking, but you could do that, right? You'd have to add 3 to it rather than 1, and you'd have to figure out what the range was, and you would have to modulus it. I'm not going to ask you anything that hard. And we will cover this topic again at a later point. But let's make a few comments as to how you use random. To use rand, you have to include C. Well, I better go ahead and look. I don't want to wing it and get it wrong. Was it part of CMath? CSTD Live. So to use rand, you have to include CSTD Live. That's definitely a quiz question. To generate better random numbers, random numbers that you can't predict, seed it with the time by doing srand subscript time subscript null in subscript, which requires time.h.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I wrote the arrow at S-frame.
So pardon me, I'm sorry. To get that to work, do # include time.h. like that.
We could even add that to our one. Our boilerplate could become 100 lines long by the time we're done.
Do you want us to add that to our boilerplate? I'll do it.
May as well, but there's nothing bad about putting extra includes. It's not like it makes the program run more slowly. On the other hand, it's nice to put in the specific # includes that you need just so you remember where they are. I wouldn't necessarily remember where srand and rand were if I just got to copy and paste out of the boilerplate each time. So I'm going to make another comment about CMath. CMath library has the POW function, although we've seen that Microsoft includes it by default. It's wrong. ABS, SQRT, sine, cosine. I think they actually spell out the word sine. Tangent, etc. We've used POW before. We know what an absolute value is. Hand tracing a program. Hand tracing a program is when you're not trusting the computer to show you what it's doing. You want to figure out yourself what it's doing. And I'll show you what I mean. Say we have a program like this. I just need some numbers to play with. So yet again, I'm going to declare some random numbers. How about J and K? So int J, int K, J equals 3. K is equal to J times 4. J equals K minus 20. I'm just making this up. And then K equals 8, the absolute value of J. Now I could run that, find out what it's going to print. But I can also so-called hand trace it. To let me hand trace it, I'm going to create a little spreadsheet in Excel. Normally I would just write it down on pen and paper or draw it on the board, but if I draw it on the board, then people at home are not going to be able to see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 columns, one for J and one for K. So at first, neither one of them has a value. We get to this line, and what does J become? Becomes a 3. Now we do the next line. J remains the same, so I'm not going to write anything under it. But what happens to K? What does K equal after this line executes? 12. So I'm going to put a 12 over here under K. And I'm also going to try to center everything so that it's easier to read. All right. Now the next line. What is J equal to after that line executes? Well, K was 12. And so we subtract 20 from it. So now all of a sudden, J is equal to minus 8. Now, K didn't change. So I'm just going to leave that blank. All right, and lastly, we go one more line. The value of K changes to what? Right, it becomes the absolute value of 8, or negative 8, which is 8. So we have hand traced it. I can be pretty sure that if I wrote out, C out K, it would see out the number 8. That's called hand tracing. I could have thrown it in a loop, and we would have to hand trace it through all the iterations of a loop. But you get the idea based on that. Especially once I pop up the PowerPoint, which shows hand tracing as well. So you act as though you're the computer. You step through and, quote, execute each statement one by one. And you record the contents of variables using a hand trace chart, a table, kind of like this. They have number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. The user types in a number. Well, I guess they typed in a 10. The user typed in a second number. I guess they typed in a 20. The user enters a third number. I guess they typed in a 30. And then we calculate the average, which is all three of those numbers divided by 3. That looks totally wrong. Oh, they're showing us a syntax error. Not a syntax error, a logic error. Why is that? What happens first according to our mathematical precedents?
Third one, number 3 was divided
This
by 3.
happens first. So they typed in a 30. It got divided by 10. Divided by 3, so this is now 10. And then they added 10 and 20 to it. So 10 and 20 and 10
I needed
is
parentheses
40.
around-
And so it said the average was 40. How would we fix that?
parentheses around none, 1, and 3,
Yep,
2, and
we
3.
need parentheses there. So we did a hand trace and we proved that our formula was wrong. Now, honestly, what would I do? I would just print out the average. But this is a way to figure out at which point there's an error, rather than just going and adding 100 print statements, one after each line, which I've been known to do. If you need to trace your program, there's a way to do that. And what do I mean by trace? What if I don't want to hand trace it? I want to see what it looks like on the computer. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to do what's known as setting a breakpoint. The breakpoint is where I want the debugger to stop so I can start checking the values. So I'm going to right click on a line number. No, I'm not. I'm going to come over to this gray column and right click. No, I'm going to click on it. Sorry, it's different for different editors. That means I'm going to stop there when I debug it. I'm not going to stop. The computer's going to stop. So I have a breakpoint there. I clicked in the margin. I run it.
What did you do?
There. It stops at that point. All I did is I clicked in the margin next to the number. That's called setting a breakpoint, and what it means is it broke at this point, meaning it hasn't executed this line yet. So J doesn't have a value yet, or it's got a bad value, -8 billion, something like that. Now I can execute the next line. If you look, we have these little symbols up here. I believe the down one is the next. I'm going to find out by hovering my cursor over the down arrow. Nope, that's called step into. So I want the step over. We're going to step over and we're going to get to this line. So I want the semicircle above the dot. All right, it executed this line. Now it's waiting to run this line. So if I hover my cursor over J, I can see what J now equals. J is now equal to 3, which as a matter of fact, if I check out my spreadsheet, it did become a 3. Now I'm going to skip this line, or not skip it, I'm going to execute that line. I'm going to step over it. So I'm going to press the little arrow with the semicircle over the dot. It's going to execute this line, and it's going to stop at line 48. Your line numbers are probably different than mine. It has run this line now, so K has a new value. I can move my cursor over it. And by the way, I don't know what the debugger looks like on the Mac. Sorry, Mac users. You can definitely do this. And so after it executed that line, K became 12. Not that you folks in the back can read that itty bitty K equals 12, but it's there. And I can go and check my spreadsheet. And K did equal 12. Now I can keep doing that. I can step through it line by line. Okay. Now I'm in a brand new chunk of code. It skipped all those blank lines. Now I'm going to calculate the square root of A, right? I can move my cursor over and find out what the square root was. Well, A was 4, so now it's 2. And so on. So you can figure out what your program is doing by debugging. And really ought to spend like 2 weeks on debugging. Because once you become a pro programmer, you're going to live inside your debugger. You're going to use it an awful lot. You can do more powerful things than what I'm doing here. I'm looking for something and I'm not finding it yet. Excuse my little pause here. Well, okay then. There's a window that shows you the value of every variable that is currently declared. Maybe it's under debug. Debug, Windows, watch, call stack, memory, breakpoints, output. I'm not spotting it immediately. Here it's called locals. All right. So to get these up, what I did is I did debug, Windows, locals, not loco as I'm going loco. And it's showing me all the variables that are currently created at this point in the program by line 58. And yeah, I had a value for A, I had a value for B, I had a value for C, and we can watch those values change. Oh, I'm not on line 66. I know that by the arrow. So if I keep executing, when I jump over this line, the value of C is going to change. C right now is equal to 3, but if I step over with the circle dot, C changed. And if I went down here, I would see that it changed to 1, and it even colored it something else so that I would know that that's the one that changed. I wish I could make that larger, but it won't let me increase the font size. These variables have not been declared yet, it doesn't look like. At some point, we're probably going to type in values for S and stuff like that, see when we come down here, and it would fill those in. Now, when I'm tired of stepping through it, I can just run it again, or not run it again. I can tell it continue. I'm tired of this line-by-line stuff. You see that arrow? That may not be it. That didn't do it. Where's the run all? Restart. There it is. They changed the symbol for it. I don't want to restart, though. I want to continue. There it is. It's just a green arrow. Sorry. Continue. And then it's going to run to the end. If I had a breakpoint later on, it would have stopped at that next breakpoint. I don't want it to stop every single time I run it, so I'm going to go and remove that breakpoint now. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the little stop sign again, and it's going to poof, make it disappear. And now when I run it, it's going to behave like it was doing before. What if I have my code littered with breakpoints, a million breakpoints, but I don't want it to stop for them? In that case, I do debug start without debugging. That sounds weird, right? Debug start without debugging, but start without debugging means don't skip at any breakpoints, even if they're defined. Otherwise, when you run it, it's going to stop at the first breakpoint. And if I say continue, it's going to stop at the next one, and the next one, and so on. Alrighty, I'm going to grab your homework assignment. Let's go look. I don't have that one as an assignment. Guess I'll go back in time and get it. All right, here's the way I want the program to look when it runs. Now, I'm sorry, but another professor created this and he made it way too wordy. Please enter your weight in pounds, and then press enter. So you type in 135. Please enter your height in feet. You type in 5.5. Please enter your age in years, 61. These are activity indexes for different lifestyles. Please select yours. If you have a desk job, no exercise, you type in a 1.2. This stuff is all displayed. You're not typing in 1.2, 1.4, 1.6. This is all information. And then it actually does let you enter it, right? Based on this information, what is your activity? Well, I don't do anything, so I'm going to enter a 1.2. And it says, Here are the results from our computation. You burn that many calories a day. And we run it again. We're a lot lighter. We do more exercise, so we burn more calories a day. So here are the specs for the program. Your input is going to be the weight in pounds, the height in feet, and don't make it to where it'll accept feet and inches unless you're just really, really insistent on do that. The person's age in years, and then an activity index based on showing them this table, right? If they're extra active, if they're Michael Phelps, then you're going to want to type in a 1.9. And then there's a calculation of formula. 66 plus 6.2 times the weight plus 152.4, whatever. If you grew up learning metric and you feel like finding the metric version of the equation, go for it. And then the BMR is multiplied, the BMR is multiplied by the activity index to get the total number of calories. So that's the basal metabolic rate, and then to calculate the calories, it's BMR times the activity index. And so here's a sample calculation, just like I showed you. 135 pounds, 5.5 feet, 61 years, sedentary is 1.2. We calculate all that stuff, and then we do that. Now this is not what you're going to display. Instead, your display is going to look more like this. I don't care if you display that. Feel free to skip that to advance your health. We will calculate however many, blah, blah, blah. If you feel like making these a little bit less wordy, that's fine. But as long as you let them enter these three values, then display this information so they know what they're supposed to type. Let them enter the fourth value, and then you do these two calculations and display the result, then you're good. I would recommend taking a look at this and maybe even giving a stab at it tomorrow so that you can ask questions about it on Thursday. On the other hand, you could, wait until the weekend, and then you can come in on Tuesday and ask some questions and then go back home and finish it off, or, whatever. I give you that day's grace period. Homework look okay? I'd seen somebody shake their head, no, but give it a shot and you'll be able to do it. Any questions? Oh, we're about done. I better create the Dropbox while we're talking. Pardon?
Can I have a copy of your code?
Yeah, you're going to get a copy of this, and I'll bring up the source code in just a second, but I need to make the Dropbox. I can even print out the source code if that'll help you.
And you had a question.
Yes, sir. Sorry. Okay, let me create the Dropbox so that people can drop it off, and then I'll be right over there. Now, I apologize for seemingly to ignore you. I'm getting the idea that the exam's just going to be over chapters 1 through 3. I'm not digging that. All right, there's a Dropbox J. Go ahead and put it in there, and now I'm going to be showing people.
Where do I understand the dotting line?
So I'm going to come up here. Yeah, that's kind of obscure. Dot ignore is kind of obscure. But the get line is pretty important. I started the recording again because it's this important. String, I don't know, AAA, comma, BBB. And then I'm going to do cout, quote, enter your name. And then I'm going to let them type it in. CIN, arrow, arrow, AAA. And then I'm going to do something else. So enter your state. And then I'm going to let them type that in into BBB. Then I'm going to print that out. Cout, quote, name, arrow, arrow, name, arrow, arrow, ENDL. And then cout, arrow, arrow, state, arrow, arrow, state, arrow, arrow, ENDL.
Okay.
So, and I shouldn't have called it name and state. My variables were actually called AAA, and BBB. All right. So now when I run it, enter your name. Now I didn't give any qualifications. I didn't tell them. I might think that I should be able to do this. You see what happened? I typed in two things. The first thing went into AAA. The second thing went into BBB without giving us a chance to type it. So the arrow just takes one piece of input, whatever you've typed in up to the next space or the next character chart. So what happens if you wanted them to be able to type in their full name? You know, a full name could be one piece of data, I'm slash, or it could be 20 pieces of data, right? I have a really long name with, you know, middle names and, you know, Beauregard, SQ, you know, Thompson the third, whatever. So that's what you use getLine for. getLine would let them enter the full name into AAA. So to get that to work, we would do something like this. getLine, parentheses CIN, AAA, rather than doing it like this. Now if we set that up right, and if no other errors are introduced that we would have to use .ignore to handle, I should be able to type in Bob Roberts, and it's asking me for the state.
Okay.
Now the .ignore is to handle weird states to where if you type in a number, there's a character turn left waiting, and then the getLine takes that one and just runs with it. So they don't get a chance to type in anything there. So if you stick that getLine in, it wipes out the keyboard buffer so that that can't happen.
So you always need to put a CIN.ignore.
I would always put that in before I call getLine. And they mention that, but they don't really call it out and demand that you do that. And I would.
I think there was a spot in the book where it said that.
Okay.
So
All
why
right.
would you use CIN instead of getLine? See,
CIN will tokenize and convert to an int and a float and stuff like that, whereas getLine always returns a string, which you then have to yourself convert. Just like in Java, you know, you can call next int and stuff like that. It's like you always just used next line, which always gave you a string, and then it was up to you to convert that string into an int or a float or whatever.
would the CIN.ignore always be a 1, comma?
This number is how many characters it's supposed to ignore. Since it was just a carriage return that was messing it up, I just made it 1. You could be a maniac and say ignore the next 1,000 characters, but 1 is enough.
Will it matter?
No,
Okay.
unless they're going to break it on purpose. If they typed in something like this, I don't know if we've broken it or not. Enter number 5. Now you can enter your home name. What happens if I type in and then I fill that full of spaces? Is that going to break it? No, it actually worked. It actually works. So 1 comma carriage return seems to work. Seems to be enough.
Rote memorization on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the purpose of all those dots showing up? Because you lost me at that point.
Which dots?
All the red dots on the edge. I followed it up until.
Over on the side.
Oh,
blinking line.
Well, when
I
it
mean,
runs, it
stop
goes from
clicking.
top to bottom. But what if you wanted to interrupt it so you could check the variables at an intermediate point? Like, what if I was curious what AAA equaled after it ran that? Well, I could set what's called a breakpoint there.
Would it have to be the one after, or like where would that breakpoint be?
If I set it here, it hasn't filled in AAA yet, which is okay. But if I run it, it's going to stop there. I don't have a value for AAA yet.
Does it stop after it's completed the line you clicked on?
Right.
or
It has
stop?
not completed that line.
It stops in front
It
of it.
stops
It stops in front of it.
in front of it. And if I wanted to execute the next line, I'm going to hit that symbol, step over. Now it has actually run that line, which is why it's asking me to fill in the name. It has executed this line, and it has stopped it before this line.
How'd you have to stop it before that line?
It did it automatically
Because you only stepped over
because
one
I
line.
stepped over one line.
He didn't go ahead and run it.
Yeah, if I clicked continue, it would go to the end of the program.
Okay.
But I told it to step over one line. And so now it executed that line. If I went back to my command window, I'd see that. And it's waiting to run this line.
Okay, so how would you find out what?
I move my cursor over it. It shows that AAA is now equal to FGFG. Or I can look at my locals and I can find AAA somewhere on here, and it's equal to FGFG. How did I pull that up? I went to I went to Debug, Windows. They didn't make it easy to find locals.
Debug Windows, okay. Can you show me how, when you mouse over the program and said GFG, did it?
I typed that in.
So it's
Right.
It's an active. So it's an update. It's a constant update. It's not.
As soon as that line executes, it filled in something in that variable, and I was able to check it.
I didn't know the program in the dialog box.
Down there, he hasn't hit the BBB yet. So, there's
So
nothing there.
BBB doesn't have any data yet. So it's an empty string. And then if I execute the next line of code, I don't know if I can do that actually because I hit break and I don't know if it's going to be crashed or not. If it was going to work, it didn't. So let me run it again. All right, so I'm going to hit the down arrow a few times and then I'm going to actually have to run to the next class. Step over, it's waiting for me to type in something. I'm going to type in Joe Bob. And this is really important stuff, so we are going to do it again. Now AAA, since I typed in Joe Bob, we see the value of AAA there. But nothing else has happened. BBB is still empty. So I step over again. It prints out enter your state. I can verify that it did that. But I haven't. It's not letting me type in anything because I haven't actually executed that statement. So I click over that. Now it's waiting for me to type in something. My state is Texas. Now it has executed that line and it's waiting to run this line. So if I hover my cursor over BBB, I see that I typed in TX, or I can see that down here.
Okay.
It's cool. We need to do that over and over to get good at it.
Now, the quizzes, can we take them more than once?
Yep, absolutely. But I need to grade them, so I will get them all
Well, I
graded
did it. I wish
post-haste.
I paid attention.
Yeah, I will grade them as of tonight, so check them tomorrow.
Please, 2 or 3.
This was chapter 3.
I will go ahead and get 2 done if you're not done with it, and I'll grade it tonight, and I'll grade them again tomorrow to make sure that they're all caught up. If you're done with 2,
I'm done with 2.
okay,
So I
but
can
you
start-
don't have a grade for it yet, probably.
Right.
So let me do that. Let me grade it.
From the first starting, so can I go ahead and start?
You could start 3,
Okay.
right? Yeah,
We haven't finished 3 though.
right, correct. So I'm not expecting you to have done it unless you just like to read ahead,
Well.
which isn't a bad idea.
I played with it. I mean, hadn't read it or anything. I just went through to see what
Right.
what I could figure it out. But I see a bunch I did wrong. So
I did not mean to let those lapse like that. I will get that done. I wish it graded it automatically, but it can only grade like the multiple choice things.
I'm doing Odyssey and I totally get that. My students on 75 different assignments.
Thank you for the questions because that tells me what I need to cover a second time.
Oh, on the ones where we didn't have classes not submitted, do we need to do anything in
No.
there? Because it says not submitted. I didn't know. If we needed to.
Yeah, I'll probably delete the Dropbox just so it doesn't confuse anybody.
It seems we don't have a Dropbox for the homework.
For today's homework, I would say that's correct.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to have to run to my next class because I'm 3 minutes late.